Awesome. Welcome everyone to the second round of Australs 2022. We'll be debating on the motion that it is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. Unless anyone has any questions, I'd like to welcome up the first speaker from the affirming team to open their case.
So I think I am audible. Okay, I will start within 10 seconds, just starting my own timer. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Panel, 4 line of characterizations I want to push in the debate. First, we have to understand what do we mean by love in the debate. Basically, in this debate, by love, we means the relationship between two opposite gender. That means the love between the male and female. The love between two same gender will be also counted in this debate. What do we mean by the never be loved? By never be loved, we mean that a circumstances where a people in past don't never ever receive love, and now he is also not getting love, and in future he is not going to also get the love. This is mean by never be loved in the debate. What do we mean by loved and lost? Loved and lost means that we are by this we are dictating a person who received love in his life, and after that he lost his love. The process of lost love can be by 3 ways. Number 1, by breakup between two persons. Number 2, because of communication gap between two persons, love can be exhausted. And number 3, because of the death of one person, love can be lost in this specific circumstances. Now, two things we need to be understand in this debate. What is the current context look like? 3 line of analysis. 1, we think the current world is extremely capitalistic, and in this current capitalistic world, everybody is always trying to pursuing their economical capital, their social capital, and their political capital. And whenever everybody is performing as a too much capitalistic entity, this world is now consists of a lot of people who are actually performing as a robot in this specific world. From that specific capitalistic world, a people may have a breakdown, a people may have a downfall in his life. And whenever a people have a downfall in his life, he obviously need a survival instinct, he obviously need a backup resources. If in this world we have seen that the people are working as a capitalistic entity, everybody works for a self-interest, and because of that specific period, whenever you are facing a downfall, a people without a love relationship is very much less likely to build in this world. Secondly, we have seen that the life itself is a hedonic treadmill, and whenever in my life I am competing in many specific sectors, the world is always a battlefield between the fittest, and this world is always being what like that. This world is always facing a competition between the fittest, and that is also the scientific rule of the world. So whenever in my life, whenever I'm getting hurt, I also need a people we can console me. If I want to get this consolence from a movie or from a book, at that particular moment I cannot share my feelings at a specific thing, but whenever I am getting loved, I am getting this type of benefit from my other people of my or my partner. Third line of analysis, that in the world we think that the survival experience is very much important, because in our world, the world is not a bed of rose. Rather, the life is consists of a lot of downfall, and in every scenario we need to adapt it with that specific scenario. And if we want to win something in my life, I must need to adapt with that thing, and this is the current context of this debate. Now understand what do we mean by the process of love making. Basically 3 line of analysis here. 1, whenever a person makes a love with another person, this whole process is driven by the emotion. I have an emotion for another person, and this emotion gives me a internal feeling for that person. Secondly, whenever I'm in a relationship with my partner, in that relationship I may have happiness, sometimes I may have angriness, and sometimes I may be anxious. All these things teaches me how to deal with different effects of my life. And thirdly, whenever I lost my life, I might be sad, and in that sad period I may have a survival effect, and this survival effect teaches me how to survive in the world. So in the debate side, affirmative comparative is very much case is very much clear. In the debate we'll tell you how loved and lost is better than never be loved. Now comes to the constructive. We have 3 arguments basically in the debate. First argument is that love teaches people to survive in the world. 4 line of analysis here. A, I think the love is a process, and in this process, a lot of small processes are happening in this full process. Whenever I am in a relationship with my partner, I am sharing my all of feelings with them. Sometimes we are arguing about things. Sometimes we are not conscious about things. At that particular moment, my partner may get angry. I may not communicate with my partner. But this type of experience give me that how to deal with different scenario of my life, how to deal with some downfalls of my life. As a person in my life, I need to access or I need to explore in many type of work. I may need to go to office, I may need to go to sports, I may need to go to education institute, and everywhere I may lose or I may win. But whenever I may lose, at least I need to deal with that specific time period. And this type of small process teaches me how to deal with that type of specific time thing. B, we think whenever I lose my life, that gives me some type of sadness. But whenever I also know that I am not okay with this type of sadness, if I getting depressed and if I become sad, I will not have any type of positive impact or added value in my life. But whenever I can know how to control my this type of emotion, at that particular moment, I can adapt with the scenario. And when I can adapt with the scenario, as a person, I am going to get a good experience in my life. See, we think the world is extremely capitalistic, and as the world is extremely capitalistic, the life experience of it is not always smooth as you want. Sometimes the decision may go against you, and we to adapt with those things, love teaches you, because you have that relationship with the partner, and your partner teaches these things in your life. And by this way, love teaches people to survive in the world, and that survival instinct is very much important in your world. Second argument, we think love helps to make people more social. Two line of analysis as follows. A, we think as a social animal, we always need company from the other people. In our social animal, we cannot survive alone if we don't have company from our social people. And from this, we get this companion from our life. Whenever we are engaging with other people in our society, we may need to attend a lot of occasions, we need to attend a lot of function, and all of these things socializes us. All of these things makes our people more social in our life. If we cannot do have any much of companion in our life at a particular moment, we may be a nihilistic person, and whenever we will be a nihilistic person at a particular moment, we will not be as much productive as we are now. B, we think in our social life, whenever I am not going to get this love from the people, from my partner or any people of my life at a particular moment, I will be much frustrated. And whenever I will be much frustrated, I will be a less dignitful person, and I will have less dignity to the other person of our society. At that particular moment, it will be less easier. It will be much easier for me to do any type of evil work or any type of crime against the social people of my life, because at this particular moment I will have a very much less respect to them, because I am not going to getting loved. That means by getting loved, I have at least some sort of responsibility to my social people. I have at least some type of dignity with my partner, and by this way I am going to be much social in our work. Third line of argument, that is the love relationship adds more value to the civilizations. Two line of analysis. One, I think in the world, if you see the world in an artistic view, we have seen that a lot of writer has already come in the world civilization and wrote a lot of literature in the world, just because they are getting love some of the person. Whenever a person has some type of love from the other person, that makes the person more fluent, that makes the person more happy. And whenever a person getting eternal happiness in their life at a particular moment, the person can be more productive at that particular time. And whenever a person gets more productive, that has also a domino effect. That means whenever I'm getting love from my partner, that keeps my mind well, and whenever my mind is well, at that particular moment I will be much more productive, and I will be much more ethical to the other animals of my society. That means I will be much more ethical to a cow. I may be much more ethical to a dog. That means by this domino effect, the social structure will be work, and whenever this social structure will be work, that will create a diversified world in your country, because at that particular moment your life is not confined in a machinery world, rather your life is confined with a different journey. That means because the affirmative case provides you a survival instinct, because the affirmative case provides you a social instinct, we think it is better to be loved than not be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. To open the case for the negating team, I'd like to welcome up the first negating speaker.
Hi, am I audible and visible? Yep, okay, great. Let me just pull up my timer and drink water really quick. All right. Okay. Speech starting in 3, 2, 1. This debate is not about basic societal and biological functions. It's not about having sex, etc. That's just physical pleasure or biological need. It's not about having children, but it's not also about companionship or having someone to share your feelings with. Because you can have friends, especially multiple friends, so you're not dependent on a single one. You can go to events together, watch movies, study together, and talk to each other. You can derive enjoyment and release stress from this without going to the point of love. It's not about marriages of convenience, right? Where both parties are civil and get to enjoy their individual lives more because they skirt the societal pressure and also have to also have each other for financial support. And they enjoy all of these without risking love. Given that love is not these things, how do we then characterize genuine love? First of all, it is genuine emotional investment, where they occupy your thoughts and time significantly, where you want to set aside time for them, and you want them to be part of your own hobbies and interests. It's when you rely on them for affirmation. You trust someone so much with your deepest and darkest thoughts, and you derive your sense of happiness from them, spending quality time with them and getting compliments from them. But the second characterization is that love is a choice. It's investing more of yourself and sharing yourself with one person. It's breaking down your barriers and making yourself vulnerable and trusting that your partner does more good than harm with that vulnerability. But lastly, that love is selflessness for someone else of the highest degree. You care so much about their happiness, and oftentimes you care about it more than your own. You would sacrifice your self-interest, you could sacrifice your hobbies and your feelings, which you suppress because it might hurt them. This debate is a value judgment debate. It assumes that you could have the ability to choose. If you could assess both choices and decide which, we would choose not to love at all. Note that this is not between loving or living a loveless life. This is an assessment of loss and if it was worth it in the end. Let's talk about the burden. Our burden is to simply prove why having not loved at all is better. What App needs to prove is why both the process of loving and the outcomes of losing and the combination of both is better on their world. And this is because each part of loved and lost contributes to the overall assessment of whether or not it is better than our comparative. So they can't just assume that love is good and prove why losing is necessary. If they fail to defend even one part of this burden, they already lose this debate. Here's where I'm going to do two things. Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about why acquiring love is risky and painful. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the process of love and why it isn't even that great. And actually, thirdly, talk about why our comparative is better. Before that, a couple of responses for the previous speaker. The first thing they say is that, well, you're going to get more sacrifice. We would say, first of all, that is harmful because it makes them sacrifice other things which do make them happy. But secondly, that App never proved why love is the most optimal form of happiness in the first place. They just assume it. But lastly, that sacrifice is worse off because you don't know to what extent you must sacrifice. And sacrifice is a never-ending rabbit hole as well. We will talk about self-sacrifice even in the post-loss aspect later on. Next, App says that they make people more social. Note that the characterization of the world being capitalist concedes to this, since selfish capitalistic forces end up pushing people to work together anyway to get the development that helps them. So there's still an incentive to be social. E.g., if people want to have better lives by means of economic development and growth, not loving is probably the optimal way to go since you pursue your career or innovation instead of love. But you still have to do things like network to push it forward, right? Under our side, people will still be social and work together. That is not an exclusive benefit coming from their side. The last thing they say is that it creates value. This isn't mutually exclusive, right? Like education, religion, legal structures exist. And these are arguably better actors of teaching values since they are more objective, right? Because you're not being like colored by your emotions. But secondly, they never prove why love creating a value system is exclusive or better than like current structures. Because even if it is values from love, that is, even though it is bad from love, it is subjective and depends on the person you are dating and can change. It can be vicious in nature, for example, depending on who you're with. First then, why acquiring love in and of itself is risky and painful. Affirmative assumes that you are likely to immediately find the love of your life, but the prerequisite to this is the dating process, randomly experimenting with various people who you might be attracted to, right? So you're more likely to find someone bad for you multiple times first, even if you eventually get to find true love. The pain that you experience extremely outweighs the process itself. First level, dating is a horrible experience because of how many emotional abusive people exist, right? Sad boys and players who feign interest in you and get emotionally dependent, make them pity you, and make them pity you, etc. Before you even truly love them, you're just attracted to them and you're slowly building up to loving them. They're already trying to sexually harass you, drug you, kidnap you, or even just try to manipulate you to get you to love them. They could even verbally assault you if you don't give them what they want. Affirmative might say that this is a minority, but this is why they are so impactful. First of all, a lot of people are trash, right? It's like the patriarchy prevents men from pursuing true love. That is apparently weakness. Lots of men just want to get as many women and sexual partners as possible. But even if you don't get these bad people, you know about their existence and are constantly living in the fear of encountering them, and that anxiety is worse for the individual. You're constantly insecure both emotionally and romantically. And that's where women don't feel safe dating. They just do it because they know it's a prerequisite to true love. But since we know the harms, we think that they should not pursue love in the first place. The second level is most people are just not compatible with you, even if you don't know it at first, right? Because relationships begin at the superficial level. You find them cute, maybe they're your type, maybe you guys have the same sense of humor, but that is not an indicator of a happy relationship. Having the same sense of humor doesn't mean you have the same way of solving conflict. It doesn't mean you have the same goals or lifestyle. People can change over time because of the pressure at work, because of new lived experiences. And that is why most marriages end in divorce where it is legal. But why is this harmful? Because investing in love in a relationship costs so much, right? We told you about the time and money that is sacrificed, how you give up your ambitions to support theirs, you move to a place you don't like, etc. Not only does it take away from other things that you could have done, but causes you to have so many regrets. You cannot perceive happiness remembering the good parts of the relationship because you compare it to what you've lost. This is important because even if you find the one true love later on and you bring about the lessons you've learned from your old partner into this new relationship, which makes you living the life you should have lived with your old partner instead of the life you should be living now, right? You also have trauma and PTSD. You probably can't trust people anymore. You probably find it far harder to give parts of yourself or properly connect with your partner. This responds to their argument about how love makes you a better person. But let's go on then to the second thing we want to prove, which is why losing love is the worst thing that can ever happen overall. So first of all, if your partner is shitty, you endured this for nothing. You probably went through some form of abuse. You were gaslit, you were stonewalled, you were manipulated, you were made to feel guilty, and you endured this in the hopes that it would become a stable relationship, that you would be endgame. But in the end, you lost them still. What this suggests is at that point, you are going through this for nothing. A lot of the things you went through is just trauma that you are collecting without the thing that you want in return. But if your partner is amazing, it's a loss to the greatest variety, right? Maybe they died, maybe they left you, but he was caring, he understood your works, he was patient with you, and now he is gone. The impact on the individual is simple. Maybe they think that there's something wrong with them. Maybe they will say, I am a bad person, or I am an advocate because I could have done better to keep them. But on the third level, intrinsically, it will traumatize you. You spend a lot of time, energy, and emotions on this person. You might never trust again. Maybe no one will ever compare to this person and you will turn out jaded. Or maybe it's only little things like visiting your favorite coffee shop that will always lead to you feeling an ache in your heart. Relationships shift your entire worldview and your own perception. Having loved and lost is where you have a lot of the permanent effects on the individual that will ultimately hurt you until the end.
Thank you very much for that speech. To continue the case for the affirming team, I'd like to welcome back up the second affirming speaker.
Hi, I think I'm audible, right? Hello, I'm audible.
Yep, you're audible.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, understand, I think the previous negative speaker was not able to debate this in a comparative way. I think this debate is not about how exactly love actually going to make you harm a lot. I think this debate is about what is actually better. Have you loved and lost, or never loved at all? I think the previous speaker should make a comparative views why exactly those people who never loved at all are so much better state than the people who love and lost. I think the entire things she actually tried to tell, look, the acquiring love is so much actually painful and actually risky process. She tried to tell us, look, it's a process by which you actually make a lot of random experiment, and at the end you actually choosing something, and maybe after choosing him or herself, you actually go through a lot of anxiety, a lot of insecurity, this sort of things. I think panel, whenever a person actually intended to actually being in a place, whenever why exactly people actually acquire for love, I think these people actually by himself think that, okay, I need to actually have someone in my life who actually going to be so my company. I think human being is by nature actually so much actually social being, but in this capitalistic world, according to our characterizations, people do not have times for other. Nowadays, people are so much busy with themselves, so much busy with their work, that whenever a person is actually vulnerable, maybe he is your good friend, but nowadays you don't have any sort of time for him. And whenever they actually come to tell you about his story, maybe some people actually laugh to him. That means in this status quo, man is so much actually vulnerable. So for this entire idea, we think whenever you're actually coming up with idea, you're actually going to acquire love with someone, even if there is some sort of actually idea, some sort of risk that you're actually going to be so much actually fear of anxiety, insecurity, this sort of things. I think at the end, you're actually having someone with whom you actually share your feelings, with whom at the end, whenever from the job sector, whenever from your institution, actually facing a lot of problems, but at the end, you have someone with whom you can actually share your feeling. You can say, you can actually hold up your head with its neck, and by this you can have a sound sleep. I think this is so much important in this capitalistic world. That means even if they actually trying to tell us, look, acquiring love is so much painful, I'm actually going to give you the comparative. Even if in this painful process a person go through, and even if at the last he actually finds someone, and maybe at the very end he actually losing the person, but it is much more better than actually not having a person who is so much vulnerable and do not have someone to actually share his feeling with. I think this is so much actually vulnerable people, because human being always need something, some reasons to live with. Maybe a person is so much successful, he have money, he have car, everything, but at the end he think that, okay, there is no point to love in this world, because nowadays I have no point to love with. People always actually live for people always live for his family, people always live for someone with him he actually satisfied with. People do not actually run always money or these sort of things. Maybe those people who are so much successful are not actually going to be very happy at the end of the day. Also, you have to think that people always need something, some art to live with. We actually see the movie Titanic, like how exactly the heroine actually at the end actually live with his story that once upon a time he has a lover. Maybe he is not actually no more in this world, but he actually living with the story by actually holding in his heart, inner heart. This is the way how exactly people actually live. People always need something to live on. People always need some story, something to tell on. I think this is important, because whenever you actually love, even if you actually lost, these things actually happens to you, and you actually spent your whole life for a person by actually remembering the good story that actually happened to you. I think this is so much important, because this world is so much actually capitalistic, and human being is by nature so much actually social being. But even if whenever they actually trying to tell us, look, the person may be not compatible to you, or the person may be toxic to you, this sort of things, I think it could be possible that the person is toxic. But you have to understand, whenever you actually in a relationship, you actually find a toxic person, there is always some sort of actually chances you actually change the person, you actually break up with him or herself and actually find a new one. And human being always actually grow through this process. But even if they're actually trying to tell us, look, whenever the breakup process happening, there is some sort of actually thing happening to them. But I think it's important, because in this particular process, whenever you actually found a second person who is so much actually good for you on this particular time, it's totally worthy that you're actually going through this pain. And whenever you actually find someone better in your life, you're never going to actually regret for this, because you now know that even if you actually go through this trauma process, but nowadays you have someone to actually feeling you share with. But lastly, even if actually the impact on individual and actually bad experience actually talking about, I think think this is so much actually easier way in the whole world. I think whenever you are not actually going to make a love relationship with someone, but maybe from your family, from your friends, all these things, you actually always have this sort of actually bad experiences, on people. And human being actually by nature actually always are having this sort of things. But I think the eternal feeling love actually giving you, the feeling, the artistic view love actually giving you is so much important. You actually think that so many people who have some sort of good artistic view always actually acquire these sort of things after actually losing love. They actually try to see the world in a bigger picture, in a different way. They actually create a lot of poems, a lot of artists, this sort of things. I think these things is so much important for your life, because whenever you're actually losing life, whenever you actually passing life in different stages, whenever you are not actually having a good relationship with your partner, whenever you're actually having a breakup, whenever the person actually died for you, you're actually creating some sort of things. The Taj Mahal in Agra also situated in as a symbol of life. So many dissertations, so many poems, so many picture nowadays actually seeing in the entire world actually happening, because the people once upon a time he actually loved and he lost his or her partner. And these things is so much important, because in the world you actually going to decide a lot of things that actually going to be a life lessons for the people. Whenever people actually go and read them, people actually understand that how life is so much beautiful, life could be so much beautiful, this sort of things. I'm actually telling you in this entire debate, look, three things. Number one, the survival experience is so much important for a person. And whenever a person actually going through this processes, going to love all these things, he actually feel happy. And from these things, he actually very small processes, he actually learn to how actually the life is so much beautiful. The eternal feeling, by the eternal feeling, at the end of the day, he or she have a urge to live in this world. I think the comparative here in this debate is that side negative try to tell us, look, love can give you a lot of negative impact, a lot of bad experiences, this sort of things. But we're actually telling you, even if this sort of things actually happening to you, this set of things actually life lessons to you, and you actually learning very actually shortly from the very little mistakes. You actually try to make your life decision so much bigger. A person who never loved at all do not actually have the eternal feeling that a person loved have. A person do not love at all, he or she try to see the world in a very much monotonous way, in a very much capitalistic way. At the end, he or she actually coming up losing everything. At the end, maybe he or she has a lot of capital, but at the end she do not have someone to tell up, because this world is so much individualistic, and this person do not have to urge to live. And maybe he or she have everything, but going to get a suicidal at the end. Nowadays we actually see in the newspaper that a lot of persons successful a lot, but are actually going to be make some sort of suicidal decisions, because the person have money but do not have someone to actually share his life. So the comparative side, government actually telling you, look, these things actually so much important, because at the end you have someone, you have an urge to live on. Thank you, panel.
Thank you very much for that speech. To continue the case for the negating team, I'd like to welcome up the second speaker.
Hello, am I audible? Oh. Hello, am I audible now? Okay, there we go. Sorry, set that up. Starting my speech. In 3, 2, 1. Wait, sorry, my timer. Yeah. Affirmative needs to let go of their fairy tale definition of love. The likelihood is 1, you will never reach the happy ending of the fairy tale. 2, the harms and the costs to reach the very end would make it impossible to enjoy the end. But thirdly, the fact that having a sad ending to what you thought was a happy ending would reverse all of the benefits that you might have. Let's be very clear. They say that we didn't defend the comparative enough. We were very clear how we co-opt all of your benefits. We told you that even without loving, you can just do basic biological and societal actions to get all of the security, all of the emotional catharsis, or at least a median and reasonable form of it that the average person would need on our side as well. We told you that you can have sex to have children for pleasure or biological need. We can have co-parenting to have the optimal children and have children that would be their source of happiness or have other forms of happiness. Or most importantly, you could have a companion, multiple friend groups that you can share whatever feelings or whatever stresses that you have with, just that you don't love anyone else, right? One, you might perhaps use them, right? Like you would have a friend with them, like instead of a marriage for convenience, you have marriages for convenience, and you also have friendships for convenience. You basically use each other, you listen to each other because you know that the other person will listen to you genuinely afterwards. And so you can genuinely talk to other people and know that you're being listened to. In fact, if you're going to say that this is the only way to get happiness from it, right? Or that these personal decisions are not enough to get you happiness, we tell you that there are also social narratives that pressure you to help other people because one, it benefits you, and it also just keeps social order intact. So not only capitalism, if you say capitalism is not enough because pursuing careers is not enough, firstly, we do think that capitalism is enough. Like genuinely, capitalism makes you nice to your employer. It makes you nice to your subordinates so that they don't quit, so that they can do work for you. All of that kind of assures a baseline level of help for each other, right? But more importantly, there are also family norms in which you have to help your child because obviously society should have future generations. It's frowned upon to not have a legacy or bloodline. And so you naturally help people in all these other ways. But what you need to realize and engage on in this debate is that even though some people choose to love, a majority of people, or at least enough people in society, can choose to be completely abusive, and it's always the people who choose to love that get hurt in the process, right? The reality is that in the world, some people date to genuinely find love, other people date just to have sex, and they're willing to do the worst excesses of crimes which are not responded to at all from affirmative right. We tell you that this outweighs a lot of the things that you say in your debate, because when these people, one, have experienced the worst things to traumatize them, make them distrusting of other romantic partners or the opposite sex in general, then obviously that is a bad thing. But secondly, if you have the threat or the constant fear that women or gender minorities experience when they just think about going into a relationship, then that prevents them from seeking out good relationships. It's probably better to just default back to your security and spend your time on other things at the end of the day. It's the same thing with how you help other people for convenience, right? Like imagine gold diggers that exist, right? People who just go into relationships, and this can be a man or a woman, go into relationships just to abuse them financially. And it's always the person who chooses to love that gets hurt at the end of the day, right? But secondly, if you want to have genuine connections to other people, I think this is just a very Western media imposed concept of how friendship works. There's also a rising trend of relationship pluralism, which means that you do still rely on other people for emotional needs, but you just divide it amongst multiple people. Like you have many friends that you can always hang out with, you can always share with someone else. And so if the friend abuses you, you just cut them off. And so therefore you're not completely dependent, but you're still not like a shell of your former self, etc., etc. Now, they say, the second part of their case is just to say, but love is always worth all of the harms, and they just don't respond to the individual levels, right? Firstly, we tell you it's not very strategic. We told you why trauma is much worse. We told you about how traumatizing people creates worse people, right? Like hurt people hurt people. Once you are a victim of abuse, you're not guaranteed to genuinely benefit from romantic relationships, because when you are scorned by a bad partner, you're more likely to repeat those kinds of harmful actions. Like if someone uses you for sex, you're more likely to use people for sex so that you're not the one who's harmed in that scenario. But secondly, you can be like so depressed from that relationship that you're not going to reach out to other people. You'll lash out at other people even when they might be good other people. But more importantly, right, we ask you, to experience happiness in life, do you really need to be loved, right? It's again just a very immediate definition of happiness, right? Because we told you that, again, it's not likely to actually get happiness from here, but there are so many alternatives which are more guaranteed and more safe for you, right? You can just pursue your career, right? The fact that you rise up the ranks and compete with other people to generate value for society at large is already a fulfilling thing. You can just go into your hobbies, the things that you are naturally just born to like, things like art, the things that you naturally sacrifice just for love, which is speculative at the end of the day, which you know as a fact that you can be happy with. And even if you don't succeed or compete in it, at least the act of doing it makes you a lot happier, right? These are just assured benefits people can derive happiness from. Women and men alike can just derive happiness from their careers, again, their children, or having their like not necessarily loving the children to the point that it sacrifices yourself, but you can live through your children, etc., etc. Love is not a priori good. We have so many other paths to happiness. But if you need to widen the margin even further, let's just respond to the extraneous things. Firstly, you need stories to tell people about. Again, this is not mutually exclusive to love. In fact, people do not like hearing stories about love necessarily. The fact that love is so prioritized, people are more likely to be jealous of your love in multiple ways. Secondly, there's also the fact of trauma dumping, right? Like when you tell people about your bad experiences and relationships, why does this lead to a good conversation starter? It usually makes people put off or awkward and ruins the emotional vibe. Which is necessarily obvious because people are selfish, but that's the sad reality that you're likely to alienate more people when all your stories are related to love, etc. But more importantly, right, like it's more assured that you can talk to people on things that they relate with, like a hobby. People relate to your hobbies a lot more, and you can share that social experience with them a lot better. But lastly, even in your very best case, during the love period, why do we tell you that it's not worth all of the harms, right? Firstly, because even after you sacrifice all the money to get into a relationship, it's still constant self-sacrifice and compromise. Romantic partners have to make multiple decisions in which just the reality of how everyone is unique, they probably have some disagreements on. Like, where do you want to live? Right? Like, what job, who's going to be the breadwinner and who's going to take care of the children, right? Are you going to have children to begin with, or if it's too much of an emotional burden or a risk to bring, or immoral to bring people into this world, right? The reality is that even when you're with a person that you love, these hard scenarios create tension between you, create unhappiness between them, such that even though the romantic needs of you are satisfied, the other needs are definitely sacrificed, and it's guaranteed. Secondly, we think that the loss of an emotional relationship, and even just the small fights, right, these small disagreements and the inability to give each other time, is what makes these relationships bad. Like, the reality is you don't have time for each other even if you love each other, so inevitably you're going to feel neglected. And we think that people comparatively remember the bad way more than the good, right? Ines told you about opportunity costs and regrets. You're always comparing what you have now to what you could have had, and since you don't know what that would be, you would assume that it would be better, especially when life problems are getting you down. But secondly, there's also the fact that we're just biologically programmed as a defense mechanism to try to avoid the harms of the past. So you relive trauma over and over again, comparatively to remembering the good things that you would pale in a comparison. And thirdly, it's the fact that you usually sour grapes on which you don't have. It's another defense mechanism, right? Once you don't have it anymore, you either mourn it so much that it destroys you, or you do try to forget about it and say that it wasn't that good after all. Nothing stands from affirmative. We have proven to you all of the harms and co-opted all of the benefits. We win.
Thank you very much for that speech. To continue the case for the affirming team, I'd like to welcome the third affirming speaker.
Am I properly audible? Okay. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. From side negative, still one question is remaining, that is, when the people are engaging in marriage, are producing children, having sex without any kind of love or affection, how the relationship being very important to them, or how this thing is adding any kind of significance to them. This is not actually clear from side negative side. Secondly, we have to understand the counterfactual world, which is not even proven by the side negative. Coming from the very comparative, firstly, which is that they have shown us many multiple alternatives, like you have family, you have friends, but you have to understand in the best case and worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, you may have the friend or family available all the times you need them. But still, after having them, whenever you come to your home, you are just thinking about your life. You are always feeling a vacuum. You are always missing something. And this feeling is very eternal, and it comes from your inner side and inner self, and which is very important. Like somewhere you are feeling empty, and the emptiness cannot be filled up by your family, by your friends, because loving someone or be loved to someone is something feelings which cannot be come from any other identities or any other stakeholders, which is very important. And in the worst case scenario of the side affirmative, whenever you cannot reach your friend because a person cannot be available 24/7 to anyone, because everyone has a personal life in the capitalistic world. The time is very important to them. That means whenever you cannot reach them properly, whenever they cannot respond to you properly, by the way, you were always get depressed and frustrated, and by the way, you cannot get the proper happiness. And when the experience they have talked about, the happiness experience, this is not availed by you, and which is a very problematic scenario from you. Secondly, you have to understand, they've talked about that love is a selflessness, which is very problematic idea, because when people are, or human beings are especially different from any other animals or any other creatures, because when you can see the other animals are finding themselves in cannibalism, harming each other, whenever people are always being empathetic, the humanity is a different kind of thing. And when you were think about just your individuality, this is just a nihilism, but it is whenever you are living in a rational mind, you have to understand, when you can make someone smile, it gives you eternal happiness. That means that inner feelings you can never be from being a selfless or being a selfish person, or being an individualistic person, right? That means the selflessness is not being occurred in the place, rather than whenever you can make someone happy, you also get the happiness from them. And it is very important, like whenever we are donating something to any poor people or any homeless people, we are feeling very proud, we are feeling very happy. In this moment, we have to understand the happiness is very important in this our life. And thirdly, they've talked about the social experience, but you have to understand the social experience you are always having without love won't bring kind of any empathetic movement in yourself, right? That means you cannot be empathetic to ourselves, because love is like a flow. When you love someone, the person always gives the love to any kind of animal, any kind of other poor people or any other things, and they are treating others so nicely. That means the love flow is very important here. Fourthly, they've talked about the sexually harassment, gold diggers, and stuff. That means in their debate, you cannot find anything rather than irregular cases like patriarch person, misogynist, or gold digger. But you have to understand, there are lots of people who are loving themselves without any kind of any kind of marginal benefit. But you can say you can see many relationships that they are having street food, they are having a seat in natural places. That means the only the love which is related with environment is not actually important here, because they are talking about an exception case. And we have to understand, maybe you can be harassed by a police. That doesn't mean that you have to demolish the police system or policies, right? You have to solve out the problem. That means this is a negative side of this thing, but you cannot judge the entire system by these kind of irregular cases, one which is came from negative. That means the side negative debated on their very best case scenario. And fifthly, they've talked about the regrets. But in which world you are getting the regrets more? Whenever you are reaching your old age, even the students who are topper in their classes don't have any kind of friends or other things or any lovable person, and corporate persons who are just deadly devoted to their economical development, the persons are clinically mostly depressed, and which is scientifically proven. That means you always have to someone which is important to you and which matters to you, and to whom you are a biggest matter. That means the internal feeling you are getting from this kind of people, and which is very important. And they've talked about that you are blaming yourself. You may think I'm not better, but we believe this in our world, in comparative side, affirmative gives a better world. When you can try to make yourself a better person, you are always giving the best output from you. And rather than this love, you are just leading a robotic life with so much money, so much persons around you without any kind of love, and which is very problematic. And from all of these cases, we believe this the side or negative are debated on their very best case scenario, and there is no comparative, and the counterfactual are not proven yet. And what is the coming benefit coming from side affirmative? Firstly, we have talking about the eternal beauty of your life, that life diversification came from literally from your love. You can discover yourself. Self-discovery is very important here, and the beauty of love is discovered by loving someone or to get love from someone. And you are connecting yourself with other person from the core of your heart, and the philosophy of love or philosophy of connecting with other people can be proven in our world, which is very important. Secondly, the creation of the artist from the artistic value view is really comes in our world in a better way. You can see the arts like Mona Lisa, Starry Night, the keys, or which were came from the artist whenever they are just betrayed there or they are in love. That means even the great novels they are coming from just by after their after to love someone or something else. That means which is very important to the world to have the loving one and love someone. And it is the whenever you were just not loving someone, that means you are suppressing your emotion consciously. You are not choosing to love someone. And when at least in our world, if you are just get deprived, you can find the new one. You have a hope mechanism. You can engage the marriage with love, but in their world there is marriage existing the idea of without having love, and which is very problematic because your children will know that your parents do not have love each other, which is very problematic. And they're talking about the sad ending. We believe this the sad ending still giving you some lesson in your life, and which is very important to you. From all of these aspects, we believe this the you might have to be loved or to love from someone. Thank you, honorable speaker.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now to close the substantive portion of the debate, I'd like to welcome up the third next speaker.
Hi, so I presume I'm audible and visible. Okay.
বাল হইছে জিতবো না কেন
Oh,
Mute
sorry.
Sorry, I said, oh yeah, all good, easy.
Yeah, it's good. All right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. All three app speakers only engage with half the emotion. We agree that loving in a vacuum is great, but that isn't the debate. We have yet to hear analysis as to why lost is justified after loving to such a great extreme as affirmative paints it to be. But also why love is an a priori good that should always be pursued at all costs given the trade-off of other values and other benefits in the debate. We have 3 independent paths to victory and side negative. First, where individuals better off. Second, where individuals can be most happy. These are the 2 most important winning clarity in the round. And third, we'll also engage with why society is better off, which is a minor issue that also want to engage with. The first thing I want to respond to is the desperate defense coming from second affirmative, where second affirmative claims that love makes people happy from oppressive capitalist structures, and you can share your problems with them. There are 3 primary responses to this. Number 1, this is just a pure assertion. They never prove as to why love automatically solves you from the oppressive capitalist systems. But second, if this is about sharing feelings, other friend groups, for example, guidance counselors or discussion groups exist in society right now, which aren't mutually exclusive, which can also be better under our side of the house because they are relationships out of convenience, which you can necessarily tap into. The point that you do need them, they never respond to this as well. But lastly, even in the best case scenario where, again, we do buy the benefit that this partner will listen to you, we would say it's harmful as well for 3 reasons. Number 1, they generally use the partner as a punching bag, as a toxic dumping site for their problems. But number 2, this partner can also give them bad advice. They never prove as to why this partner is always the best person to give advice to them if they're having problems with their work, for example. But number 3, we told you that the point at which you over dump your partner, you also become extremely reliant on the partner. The point at which that individual does break up, which is, again, is likely given that the emotions that they will lose their partner, also means that they're unable to fend for themselves and they can be independent. This takes out entire affirmative case in their best case scenario. There are 3 impacts to this. Number 1, their primary benefit isn't mutually exclusive. Number 2, they have missing mechanisms to prove the validity of their own analysis. But number 3, even if it is successful, they never prove as to why. I just saw much worse off in the long run because they have to break up as per the motion. The other things I want to respond to then come from the majority of the affirmative case. The first idea is that people make sacrifices. Number 1, we already told you as to why This is generally harmful because this means that you have to sacrifice other things, even if these other things make you happy. For example, your career, for example, hobbies in your life, make time for his partner. But number two, they never proved to us either as to why love is the most optimal form of happiness. Because we told you that this form of happiness of love is based on your partner's standards towards what they find as happy. So you pleasing your partner is good, but the point at which they change your standards, you have to do something else able to please them over and over again, which just opens an entire never-ending rabbit hole of you necessarily trying to please your partner. But the last level here is that even if it is worth it to some degree, you would have to break up with your partner at some point per the motion, which just means that you are left with huge amounts of trauma, a huge amount of vacuum in your heart which you're never necessarily able to fulfill. The impact of this response means that on either side of the world, even if the partner is good or bad, the sacrifice isn't worth it because you will be harmed to such a great degree afterwards, to which you might not be able to recover, or it takes a very, very long time for you to be able to recover, the point at which you have to trade off other parts of your life. Second, the idea they claim that this makes people more social overall. The first response here is that people become social anyway because of capitalist forces. They themselves concede capitalism is so strong, and reasons why people necessarily bond together because of capitalism, because of economic growth, wanting to develop, wanting to innovate together, work together. Like, you working together is just part and parcel of you wanting your own selfish need to better your own economic growth and your own finances, for example. But second, we would say that this sacrifice over time also makes it worse off for affirmative, because then they devote all their time and effort to this one individual. But the point to which they break up, they never prove as to why that breakup is actually worth it. Why does all the time then lost towards the individual ultimately a good trade-off that they have to take? But lastly, we would say that people are marginally much more social than our side of the house. And this is an important weighing here, necessarily because capitalist structures force you to work with different groups of people, different personalities than just one person. So if it is about learning from these experiences, you would say learning is much better off on our side because you are forced to work with different working groups all the time. The last thing that they claim is that this creates value. And this also talks about how love makes you more empathetic towards individuals. Number one, we told you why this isn't mutually exclusive. We have things like the education system, religious structures, legal structures, which exist to rein in people towards what is right and wrong and moral values, for instance. But number two, they never prove as to why the value system that they have in relationships and romantic relationships, for example, is ultimately better than status quo. In fact, people claim that status quo mechanisms are much better because these things are grounded on objective fact, e.g., the idea that you should not kill, the idea that you should not beat up your partner. Sometimes your partner might like the idea of getting beat up or them beating you up, for instance, which isn't a net good, but you might do this because you might want to sacrifice for your partner overall. The impact here is that the value system is better on our side of the house because we make it the most objective and fairest value system, which cannot be misconstrued or damaged by your partner in the case that they necessarily want to misconstrue it. What is our counterfactual then? Why did we solve the problem? Number one, we make it so that we make sure that individuals don't pursue this sort of emotional romantic attachment, which means that this debate is being judged on the individual micro level. So we'll also engage later as to why this should be judged on the societal level, but overall this debate should be primarily assessed on the individual level and the individual's choices that they do. But lastly, if they want to bring in ideas like the family, children, for example, to the equation, we would say that legal obligations exist to make it so that children are also much better off, that they're so well fed, for example, that you don't abuse them, you don't abuse your partner in a family setting, for example. But also they claim that the world is extremely capitalist, then families, partners also have an incentive to do well with one another or make their children, breadwinners, to be able to provide more for the family and get more economic growth. Lastly, why is our pathway to happiness much better off? There are three reasons why. Number one, their idea of love and affirmative is imposed by society through narratives, meaning people try to subscribe to these narratives overall, meaning even in the best case scenario where individuals find love on their side, it's imposed on the idea of media of what love is, imposed by societal structures of what love is, meaning people ultimately can't decide as to what is the most optimal form of love on their side of the house, and you'll always be subject to these kind of structures that dictate and determine what kind of love is the best way to go. Meaning the point at which you don't fulfill that standard of love, you're ultimately failing your partner or failing certain individuals on that. But second, we would also claim that people are much happier on our side of the house because then they can determine what kind of happiness that they want to aspire or espouse for. The reason why this is better is because the version of happiness on our side isn't ultimately dictated or isn't predicated upon how another individual feels happiness, but it's predicated upon your individual action, how you act within a company, how you act towards your peers, how you act in any sort of setting that makes you happy, or towards your hobbies, for example. That is not predicated on, did I do enough to fulfill what my other partner wants to do? Why do we make society better off? And this wins the minor clash as well. Number one, because affirmative consider the strong capitalist forces, strong capitalistic force exists. Therefore, innovation development will still exist on our side of the house. But second, do you say that we get better development because people then focus on their own selfish needs, which oftentimes again drives innovation, economic growth, because your career is directly tied towards capitalistic growth for your company as well, meaning you have an incentive to do better if you want to gain more and be more selfish. But number three, we also prove to you as to why society is ultimately much better off since people are more objective and they don't bring in their subjective or personal lives into work, meaning we don't make it so that your personal, emotional, romantic connections ultimately make your worse work, like make yourself less productive or worse off overall. Why do you win the comparative in the worst case scenario? Because even in our worst case, where potentially they fall in love under our side of the under their side of the house, it is still much better because at the very least you can become selective, the point at which you are unlikely to choose someone that's incompatible or like ideally wrong. Therefore, under our side of the house, they are less likely to go into heartbreak or go into like fallout, for example, because we at the very least we're necessarily able to ensure a greater chance for happiness. So in the absolute worst case under our side, where people may fall in love or may have those strings towards wanting to find another partner, for example, or enter a relationship, it is much better because then you become extremely selective about the individual that you want to choose, given that you experience other forms of happiness to begin with, given that you widen your options to begin with at the very least. So we told you why we're necessarily able to win. One, why individuals are better off. Second, why we get better value creating systems overall, why this is better for society on net as well. But lastly, as to why this is better for the individual's form of happiness because they can choose what they want to do. And in the worst case where we have to consider their benefit, it is still much preferable marginally. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, as is customary, we reverse the speaking order and half the speaking time. So I'd like to welcome back up the leader of the negating team to deliver the reply speech.
Oh, sorry, just to clarify, it's me, DLO, giving the reply. Yeah. Starting my speech in 3. Okay, sorry, this is cheesy, but I'll just do it. Just in case LJ, my girlfriend, watches this, the only exception to our arguments is you. I don't intend to love you, so to lose you. So that's why these arguments don't apply to you. Sorry, just so we have a bit of fun in this debate. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason why affirmative loses this debate is because they assert what love is without proving the likelihood. Let's go through all of the things that they say love is and prove to you why we beat them as to why it's not those things. First thing they say is that love is dependence and being able to rely on someone for your own security and your emotional needs. We've co-opted this and told you about all the different ways of dependence on other people, things like relationship pluralism, things like marriages of convenience, and how all of these things are completely unresponded to by the end, right? Even if perhaps they could have had a chance by talking about how this does not stick through towards the end, they simply did not acknowledge these things' existence. But if what they want is that you want intensity of dependence and for the people who you're dependent on to really give you so much, we told you that societal narratives can fulfill all of this, right? Narratives are much stronger and they actually enforce a lot more accountability, like your parental accountability and the social capitalistic need to help other people if you want to save yourself. The second thing they say is that love is happiness. Affirmative says things like money can't buy you happiness, and so they negate all of our alternatives like a career as not valuable. But in reality, this debate is not about happiness on AF versus superficial things on Nick, because we told you how we get happiness using resources like money to pursue what you personally selfishly want. Resources can go to ambitions, passions, and fulfillment. We'd say that fulfillment, things that you're feeling accomplished because you did things your way and all those things, might even be better than happiness because it's not fleeting. It gives you a lot of feeling of control, things like control, which happiness often denies you when you have to make so many sacrifices. The weighing as to why our happiness is more guaranteed, though, is firstly, be achievability, right? Like if you actually pour your resources into your passions, then you're guaranteed to be competitive in them or even just at least do them constantly, right? But more importantly, it's besides achievability, it's also more Like it's more like comparatively love, it's not achievable because of how many bad people there are in the world, compatibility. More importantly, again, like it's not fleeting happiness, it's not contingent on someone else. You're always in control of the happiness you get from this. The third thing they said is that love is empathy, right? They had this general narrative that you reap what you sow. When you love others, they'd make you a better person, and if you love them, a loving person will come to you. Firstly, we said all of the reasons why empathy is not the default, that most of society is abusive, and that being the one who shows empathy or devotes yourself to a relationship will not actually get these things back for you, right? People should not be social battering rams to create an empathetic world because of capitalism, because of all the toxic people, because of the patriarchy and all of these things. You are not likely to find someone who'd be kind to you. But most importantly, we told you that hurt people, right? In fact, it goes against your empathy when you put yourself so much at risk and you feel like all that is returned to you is harm, and therefore you're more likely to be abusive to others in the future. In our worst case, our level of empathy is a baseline, right? Like you're empathetic to people, maybe not strongly, but you can still do it to your friends. But also, you're still helping other people. We don't see why empathy is necessary, because in reality, at least on our world, everyone knows that they're just doing it to serve themselves. And so, yeah, like there's no one at risk because of that. Last thing they say that love is that love is passion, right? This is a big stretch that comes out as a last ditch at whip, right? They say that love might make you things better like art because it makes you feel more emotion, right? Makes you better at parenting because you get more attached. This assumes that your lover, that your love and your passion is always related. Like again, usually all that love takes away for people who are not in creative fields is time, right? So as a STEM person, I risk my grades every time I'm with a person I love. But more importantly, again, like passions, just focusing on ambitions and the sacrifices you need to make to get a relationship to begin with, detract from all these things. What about all of the negative harms, right? They assert that this debate is just about being in love. They never talk about trauma. They never talk about toxic people. They never talk about the process of getting love because of chance, right? You are not compatible with everyone, and not everyone is kind to you. So you're probably going to go through so many bad relationships that will make it impossible to enjoy the one good one you have. Nothing stands.
Thank you very much for that speech. And to close the debate, I'd like to welcome up the leader of the affirming team.
It's second speaker. Okay, so starting in 3, 2, am I audible? Can anyone confirm?
Yep, you're audible.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think this entire debate actually gone very much wrong way from side native. From that entire debate, I just found how exactly a person actually being so much toxic in your life, a person actually being pervert, a person actually being gold digger or this sort of things, they actually try to always argue towards you that look how exactly this sort of actually love, whenever actually putting yourself on someone, this is always actually something that actually problematic for you. But in the counterfactual, in your world, there are so many people who actually being encouraged from their partners. There are so many persons who actually going to chase their dreams after they actually dumped by their partners. I think this example also exists in this world. But even if, so I think the entire idea they're actually talking about also exists a counterfactual. They actually nullify these things in the first place. But secondly, even if why we still exist in this debate, we think from our side, we actually show you how exactly from the life experiences, a person, whenever actually being dumped, even if he actually from the very little experiences, while all these things, a person actually gathered his life experiences. A person actually learned how actually to control his emotions. Actually, a person actually learned how exactly the entire life actually circulate. I think these are the things that is so much important from this debate, that it actually stands from side affirmative. But secondly, actually coming to the idea, look, for happiness, you do not actually need any sort of things. You can actually produce child, you can actually having sex, and you can having mental support from the multiple friends. But we actually telling you, even if these things actually happening, I think the eternal feeling a person believed in, that is actually love. I think they entirely repeatedly actually nullify these things. Love is not something exclusive, but we entirely believe that this is a factual things, and love is actually eternal feeling. But whenever actually coming to tell about the multiple friends and this sort of things, I think this person could be proved actually wrong towards you. This person may have some other priorities in their life. So this is not always starting actually you actually having this person. Whenever you are in mental trauma, you actually having some sort of bad day. If you do not have this person by your side, this is not actually totally OT of it, this sort of things. I totally believe that having said this sort of things are actually coming up with the idea about the children could be raised in this sort of ideas. But you have to understand, whenever a person loves someone, he always have a urge to actually maintain this family structure. But those persons who do not actually love at all, just because of this children, they do not actually going to actually maintain this structure. So this is so much vulnerable for a stake of a children, that whenever this person do not have love but still being existing towards themselves, this is also destructive to the child at all. But they're actually coming up with the idea that the time actually I'm investing, all the trade-off I'm actually doing, but at the end, is it actually worth it or not? This sort of question. I think this debate is literally belonging in this idea. A person actually being actually so much flourished, maybe a person actually being so much successful in his entire way of life, but at the end, we're actually telling you, whenever this person actually ended up being nothing, ended up being not loved by anyone, and at the end, he actually feel like that I didn't actually achieve at all in the entire life. This is what the feelings that actually make a person actually mentally so much vulnerable in this debate. All the sacrifices, compromises, and all these things actually talking towards in this debate, we think these things actually mutually exclusive, because these things you have to also pursue in your all other relationship at all. But the thing that is that love actually giving you the eternal entire feeling that you couldn't actually going to actually access. So many people who are actually so much depressed, who are actually so much not pathetic to their career, whenever they're actually being in love, actually being changed for this. I think people actually changes for life. People actually having some sort of problems for their lives. But at the end, people actually not stop loving, because love is something that at the end actually being a person being fulfillment. I think this philosophical characteristics of love is so much important for this debate, because whenever all the alternatives actually talking about all the happiness things actually talking about pursuing career, hobby, this sort of things, at the end, these sort of things are not actually going to make you so much actually mentally vulnerable at the end, or even if they actually make you vulnerable at the end, we're actually telling you this feeling is so much important for your life. So I think from all status quo and all the stake, you have to understand that being loved and actually being dumped, this sort of things is so much better, because a person who actually never loved do not actually feel the eternal feeling, do not have the urge to actually live on. Thank you, panel.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech and for that debate. Awesome. Thanks everyone for a great debate. The panel was unanimous, so I would encourage everyone to feel free to message any of us for feedback after this debate. We awarded this debate on a relatively clear margin to the negating team, so congratulations and commiserations. In terms of how we saw this debate play out, I think the debate broadly comes down to three main issues. Firstly, whether the benefits from love are exclusive. Secondly, whether that love will always be good, and this point kind of helps provide a scale to the benefit of love and compares it to a world where you don't try to love at all. And then finally, what happens when that love goes away, and that establishes the comparative for the negating team by showing what that loss actually looks like. On that first issue of whether the benefits from love are exclusive, I think the affirming team runs quite a good broad list of benefits that you can get when you do experience love. Those are things like happiness, learning social skills, being able to share vulnerabilities, and also slightly more abstract things like survival skills, communication skills, and like kind of stuff like art and self-discovery. I think the affirming team is able to show relatively well that the emotion of love enhances all of these things and gives you more avenues to experience them. The problem for the affirming team, however, is that I don't think it's clear why these benefits are necessarily unique to feeling love, or what the special connection is between love and those benefits that occur that means that love is an integral link. They aren't comparative to the other ways that I think the negating team is able to suggest where these benefits can arise. And so they attack on these grounds to claim the large extent of these benefits and also potentially demonstrate how love can make those specific benefits worse. So what does the negating team say here? They tell us there are other ways that we can access all of those benefits like happiness, social, being social, and vulnerabilities through other systems of morality and value, things like religion, through self-interest that people have to be social, through like biological functions, friendships, but also other things like career progression and hobbies, all of these things that can give you access to the concrete benefits you get without necessarily feeling love. I think the further thing they do here, though, is demonstrate that love creates a unique reason to sacrifice on your own ambitions and values I think more could have been done from the negating team to explain why, like, even sacrifice in the nicest relationship is harmful and regrettable. But as it stands, it does add some impetus to explain that perhaps love doesn't give you the best version possible of those benefits that the affirming team claims. The affirming team could have done more to explain why the value systems that the negating team stands behind are insufficient, or why even those value systems rely on love. But given that they aren't able to do this, I think it is fair for the negating team to claim that these value systems will exist under their side of the house, and they're able to demonstrate that people can still benefit from these. So even if they don't experience love itself, they can access the benefits, the tangible benefits that love gives you. I think at the end of this point, the negating team is already able to determine that a lot of those benefits from love can be found without experiencing love itself. Further, I think even though this debate is judged on an individual metric with regards to how an individual is better off, if we do extend it to a societal level, I think they are able to demonstrate that people at large still have reasons to help each other, even if those reasons aren't founded in love. Then in terms of whether that love will always be good, and I think this is where the negating team is able to extend the margin by discussing what happens when people are in the process of pursuing love. They tell us that love is not always guaranteed, but in the process of trying to achieve it, people expose themselves to a lot of torment, whether that's being used by people who want something else, whether it's them meeting people they're incompatible with and experiencing the torment of trying to navigate that, or even just the investment of cost into things that won't work out. But I think the final thing they say is just that there is like a fear of these bad things happening, which means that the experience is worse when you are trying to engage with it, even if that bad thing doesn't accrue. The affirming team responds to this by explaining that a lot of these worst instances are an incredible rarity of examples, and that most people engage in good faith. I think the problem is, though, that this response is only mitigatory to the claim that the negating team brings, and that it only engages with the group of people that are actively malicious. The negating team, I think, has two responses built into this within their case, which is firstly to say that even the large group that does act in good faith may still be incompatible, may still require sacrifices, may still invoke insecurities, meaning that that process is still difficult. But I also think they bring some interesting analysis with regards to the way that people engage with love, meaning that people who are really trying to find that good love are more easy to be taken advantage of. So I think the impact of all of this analysis is that in the process of finding love and then making sacrifices in that love, that in itself can be bad, meaning that that benefit, even if it does exist, can be scaled down to a large degree relative to a world where you don't try to experience those things. Finally, then what happens when that love goes away, and that's kind of that comparative of what that loss actually looks like. And I think the negating team, again, is able to extend the margin here by explaining why the loss of a love that you feel to the greatest degree is so bad. I think the affirming team overwhelmingly in response just focuses on how the lessons of love and those benefits still stay with you in later life, even when you move on past that love, and how you can kind of channel that hurt into other more productive means. I think in contrast, though, the negating team is able to demonstrate that loss can be overwhelming in a lot of ways, whether that is people fixating on the negative parts in order to try and learn from them in the future, therefore causing emotional harm to themselves, or even just the idea that people think of everything they lost in that process, making them dislike the good parts of it even more when they think about what could have happened otherwise. All of this means that there are tangible harms that arise from losing the love. And I think the affirming team doesn't engage sufficiently with this material, rather only focus on the benefits that love does bring in other areas. Once I'm willing to believe that those benefits aren't exclusive to the affirming side, however, and rather impose their own harms, I think that comparative becomes significantly worse for the affirming team, and that's why the negating team is able to win on a clear margin. So congrats again and commiserations.